Hey, welcome back to the studio. This year, Dune Part 2 will be coming out, and we're going to be doing a lot more content exploring the world of Dune in preparation. In this video, we wanted to answer the question, why do the Fremen worship the sandworm? What is it to them? The short answer is that it's a deity, and we're going to get more into that as the video goes on, so stick around. So in Dune, in the Dune universe that was built by Frank Herbert, we know that the Fremen are a group of people living on Arrakis, and that they show reverence in the books and in the TV show and movie adaptations to what they call Shai-Hulud, which is the sandworm or the giant sandworms or multiple sandworms. And what it is to them essentially is it's a physical manifestation of deity, of their deity, of a one true god or a creator, if you will. Maybe not even necessarily as a deity, but as the instrument of a deity. Stuff along those lines is the reason that they show reverence to the sandworms. To fully understand why, I'd like to go through kind of the life cycle of a sandworm, its importance to Arrakis and to the Fremen and to the universe in general in this video. So let's just start at the smallest piece, and that is at the sand plankton level. On Dune, there is the spice melange, and the sand plankton is essentially like a life form that feeds on the melange as a food source. And eventually, they get enough sustenance to become a sand trout. And the sand trout is a really small, kind of part living creature, part plant type thing that goes around and it looks for water. And it tries to find water, and then it takes the water down to like the deepest parts of Arrakis. There's many sand trout, like millions and millions and millions of sand trout. They're one of the most plentiful organisms on this planet. So much so that the Fremen seek to make sure that the water that they capture is cordoned off from them. So they'll put creatures like little fish, or I don't remember exactly what they call them, but they put them in the water so that if a sand trout does get into the tank, it will kill the sand trout. Sand trouts also produce kind of if you squeeze them, I guess you get kind of like a spice substance. I don't know the importance of it, if there is an importance of it. I just read that it was mentioned. And then from the sand trout, the next kind of phase of the sandworm evolution is the pre-spice mass. So once they get enough food and they gather, they start to excrete more of this like pre-spice liquid and stuff, and eventually they hoard together. They create what's called a pre-spice mass, and this is where the spice mixes with like carbon dioxide and stuff, and then it'll eventually explode. And in the book, and I believe in the original movie or series, that's how Wyatt dies, if you didn't know. In the movie, it's different. Wyatt is swallowed by a sandworm. In the book, it's one of these pre-spice masses that explodes, and Wyatt sinks down into the sand. Most of them die during the pre-spice mass explosion. Most of the sand trout die, but the ones that survive go into a hibernation, and from that they emerge as sandworms, like sort of the base level small sandworms, about 3 meters long. It's from those that the Fremen create the water of life, which is really important in their rituals and things that they do. After that, sandworms will either grow or their growth will be stunted. If they grow, they become makers. Maybe they're all called makers. I just assume that the big ones are called makers. And the Fremen worship them as kind of like forces of nature, as gods. They say in the movie and in the book, "Bless the maker and his water. Bless the coming and going of him. May his passage cleanse the world. May he keep the world from for his people." So if you've read the book, if you've watched the movie, you know that the Fremen are very religious. In the book reads like scripture. It's very flowing. It's very much this sort of language in the book. And that's fun. It's fun for that kind of storytelling. It's fun for that kind of world building. It's something I enjoy and appreciate when you have such high concept sci-fi. It can often be difficult to come up with new religions with new lore for your story. But in this, Frank Herbert bases a lot of their lore and a lot of their religions on religions from Earth. And he just sort of changes them, makes up new lore as things go by, as things pass, that things change, but sort of have a basis in our reality. From there, I want to just touch briefly on the religions of the Fremen so that we kind of know where they're coming from in this worship of Shai-Hulud. The Fremen religion revolves around survival and strength. It's what helps them survive. If you have such rigorous practice in your life, you're going to survive in such a brutal world. And its origins come from the Zensuni wanderers. So in the past, there were wanderers. There's wanderers all over in the Dune universe. Back in the day, they were called the Zensuni wanderers, and they got their teachings and their religion from old Islam and Buddhist teachings. And as time went on, I think eventually there was a merger of other old Earth religions and the Zensuni, what they carried with them, to eventually create the Orange Catholic Bible, which is kind of like the universal religion in the Dune universe. There's not like a church head, but it's spread throughout. But we know that the Fremen come from the Zensuni side before the merger. But after that is when the introduction of the Bene Gesserit Missionaria Protectiva, that was what they introduced to the Fremen society, to the Fremen religion, to further their genetic program. So they're searching, obviously, for the Kwisatz Haderach, the person who can see back in time, see forward in time, who can think like a mentat, to kind of combine these three elements of human nature that we have in the Dune universe. So the Bene Gesserits can see into the past. The Spacing Guild can see into the future. That's how they get around the universe. And the mentats think like supercomputers, because robots made in the likeness of man are illegal in the universe. There was a big war. There was a lot of stuff with that. And so they detest machines that think like man. So they made men that think like machines. And that's what the mentats are. Paul Atreides is all of these. He's a mentat. He has the Bene Gesserit stuff. And he has the Spacing Guild precognition. So all of these together into this super being is what they were looking for, and it's why they did this on so many of these worlds where it's very dangerous. A lot of these worlds where a Bene Gesserit mother could come in and kind of just take control and make sure that the offspring of their selection, who they selected to be the Kwisatz Haderach, would be safe. So that's also part of their religion. All of these rely on the spice, the melange. The Bene Gesserits need it to see into the past. The Spacing Guild needs it to see into the future. And I think mentats need it. I'm not sure on that one. They may not. That might be the one that they don't need the spice. So the spice is very important. And its creation comes from the worms. It comes from the sand plankton, it comes from the sand trout, and it comes from the pre-spice masses exploding. And then eventually, it comes from the sandworms themselves. They consume sand plankton. They filter them through their teeth. The large, sort of curved-in teeth that we see in the movies. They won't eat humans because they're allergic to water, which is strange because the sand trout seek out water, and then the adult forms avoid it altogether. They will eat a human, but it doesn't provide them sustenance. For a small worm, that could be detrimental, that much water in a human body. Furthermore, the sandworms create the crysknife, which is something that the Fremen use in rituals. It's something they use in their way of life, in their religion. It's part of their religion. It's part of their soul, essentially. It's part of their body. It's an extension of themselves. The crysknife is sacred. You know, it's not allowed to be viewed by outsiders. Yeah, I mean, they're supposed to be killed. If an outsider sees a crysknife, they're supposed to be killed. It's also supposed to draw blood. Once it's been pulled from the sheath, it can't be put back in until it draws blood. So there's a lot of traditionalism, a lot of rules to follow in the Fremen religion, and a lot of it revolves around the sandworm. And if it's not the sandworm specifically, it's about the spice, which is produced by the sandworm. Fremen are also seeking to terraform their world. They're trying to slowly bring it back to the state it was once in thousands of years before, a state of lushness, a state of greenery and water. The issue with that, though, is the sand trout actively seek out water. And in fact, it's revealed in the books that the sand trout were probably introduced to this planet sometime in the past and have terraformed it to become the way that it is. So it's a sort of a strange existence that the Fremen have, that they worship Shai-Hulud, which means old man of the desert, and they worship Shai-Hulud. They exist from Shai-Hulud. Their strength and power that they get from absorbing the spice comes from the sandworm, and their strength of will comes from living in such a dangerous environment. They even ride the sandworms. They'll take out what are called maker hooks. They'll call a sandworm with a thumper, take out what are called maker hooks, and pull back a scale because the, underneath a scale is very sensitive to the sand. So the sandworm will roll up and they'll ride them. So it's a source of transportation. It's a source of fear, and it's a source of weaponry. The sandworm is a huge part of these people's life and death. And, if there's one thing that Frank Herbert did in his books, it was to kind of show the human nature of control. The Bene Gesserit want control through the Kwisatz Haderach. The Emperor wants control. The Harkonnens want control. Even to some extent, the Fremen want control over their environment. The only one, and I wouldn't say that the sandworms want control. They just have dominance by nature. And when you try to control nature is when things go bad. We saw that in Jurassic Park. I'm just, realizing that. I was going to start going into quoting Jurassic Park. We end up with this weird place where the Fremen want something for their future that goes against kind of what the sandworm does, how it lives, how it exists. It even goes kind of against what humanity needs in this universe, which is the spice. It's so important. It's part of their infrastructure. In essence, you could see the sandworms as a sort of deity, as a sort of god that control everything that is happening in this universe. The very coming and going of the worm creates an existence for humans that then in turn use to try to control the environment, to try to change things. It's almost like an Ouroboros, like a snake eating its own tail. The cycle never ends. And it's an interesting story. I hope it's been fun to come along with me on this journey to learn a little bit more about Dune. And of course, if any of this strikes your fancy, you can go and there's plenty of sources out there on the internet to look up and research. We've got the new movie coming out hopefully this year, later in November. So I'm super stoked, very excited. The first one was super enjoyable. Talk to us down in the comments. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me what you think. If I got anything wrong, definitely let me know. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.